I think music theory is kind of bad because it's extremely limited. And before I start on this video, the first thing I'm going to say is that we really run into an issue of terminology, which is that the phrase music theory is a really bad phrase because it makes it sound like it's a theory about all of music when it really isn't. It's a very, very, very tiny specific subfield in the umbrella field of musicology. The study of music in general is called musicology, and it has subfields like ethnomusicology, psychoacoustics, etc. And one of those subfields is music theory. But this one happens to be the oldest and most European, and so it gets called music theory as if it's a totalizing theory of all music, when really it isn't. So the fundamental issue, that's going to become a funny phrasing in a second. The issue at the base of music theory is that it's built on top of false premises. Um, and that false premise is the assumption, the unfounded assumption of the total supremacy of the fundamental. And in music, the fundamental, every time you make a noise, uh, that noise is a weird wiggly wave, right? And whenever you have a wiggly wave, you can break that down into a series of sine waves, right? It's because of maths. I don't really understand it either, okay? Um, and the fundamental is the lowest sine wave. So, uh, and then every sine wave above it are called overtones. Music theory has no interest in any of the overtones. It only has interest in the fundamental. So, or the root, or whatever you want to call it. Um, so when you say like this note is G, what you mean really is that the fundamental is G. Um, there is no pure. Well, you could produce a sine wave electronically, and then it will be purely a G. But uh, that sine waves constitute a very small portion of the total possibility space of sounds. Um, so, music theory makes that false assumption and then builds on it. So, if you think that the most important thing about music is the fundamental, then you're going to start talking about things like chords, and you're going to start talking about chords in terms of multiple fundamentals stacked on top of each other, um, rather than the relation of their harmonics, for example. You're not going to be very interested in rhythm, um, because drums don't fit into this um, framework, right? Like you're not going to get much useful information out of analyzing a drum based on its pitch content, right? We're interested in its transient rhythmic content when we talk about drums, and so traditional music theory does a very poor job of dealing with the actual intricacies of rhythm. Of course, it can express rhythm to some extent. It has concepts like time signatures and tuplets and whatever. It has some concepts to talk about rhythm, but it doesn't have the tool set to really get down to the meaning of rhythm in the same way that it has a tool set to talk about the meaning of tonality. So, like, you can have a theory of functional harmony, but you can't have a theory of functional rhythm. Like, that doesn't exist. Uh, and that's a fundamental flaw because music theory was developed in the classical world where rhythm works in a particular way, right? You have a lot of instruments with slow attacks, right? Like um, violins, bowed instruments, kind of slow attacks, wind instruments, etc. Like you don't generally have um, sharp that many. You know what? Right? Okay, whatever. Right? And so classical music doesn't have Western classical music, I should say, doesn't have the same. Um, it's very strange, right? Like Western classical music is very atypical in the totality of music in terms of its relation to rhythm. Like if you look at the majority of folk musics across the world, they have a much stronger rhythmic component, in large part because they were meant to be danced to. Um, but Western classical music has its origins in the church and uh, music for a liturgical purpose, a specific liturgical purpose, not dance. And it all evolved from that, including the music theory that developed to describe Western classical music. And so it's all very limited in terms of its ability to deal with complex and interesting rhythms and their meaning. And meaning is also something very key because music theorists um, they have this very limited perspective where they don't understand that music is a sign system at its core. And I think there's a good when I talk about music theory, right? What I mean is, you know, what someone like Adam Neely does or whatever. When I say music as a sign system, let's take an example. Early on in my YouTube videos this channel, I made a video about Jacob Collier, and it seems like the Jacob Collier hate train has grown, which I'm very happy about because I'm not a big fan of this guy. Or at least I'm not a big fan of his music. I'm sure he's a perfectly nice guy if you meet him. I have no idea. I've never met him. But he had this song, and I made a video about it. I think it was this one with the love in my heart. Yes. Um, he had this song, and I made a video about it where I tried to explain why it doesn't work. Right? It's like a 6 minute song. It's just white people invent prog. Every like 10 years, white people invent prog again. Like this just kind of happens. Um, this is the bit I'm looking for. Hold on, give me a second. Okay. So in the video, I deleted it because I did a really bad job of explaining myself. So but now I'm older and wiser and I can explain what I was actually talking about. So this is the section in With the Love in My Heart by Jacob Collier, which I think is very emblematic of the problem with his music. Okay, this isn't actually the right section. I think. Maybe it is. Maybe it comes after this. This bit, right? So he's doing this funky thing, and then it transitions into this trap rhythm with his like a cappella choir on top of it. And the reason that this really stuck out to me, my initial listening of the song when it came out 5 years ago, oh god, 5 years ago already, is that why did Jacob Collier put 808s and like rattling hi-hats and you know like like why is that in the song to for Jacob? I think he probably wouldn't be able to say it in any other words than he thinks it sounds cool, which is like fine. You can do stuff whatever you think sounds cool, whatever. Um, but like by my analysis, the reason why this doesn't work is that those sounds are signs. They don't exist in a vacuum. They're not pure waves in the air with no social context. They have a social context. They're associated with a particular genre of hip hop music, and hip hop music is associated with a particular part of culture, a particular group of people. Black people. It's something that Jacob Collier, I'm assuming, has never interacted with. um, you know, and so if you're gonna be making reference to that in the middle of your, prog jazz fusion song, you better have a reason to do it. Like you better be interacting in some way with the cultural signifier or signified, I guess, with the signified of your musical signifier. But Jacob Collier doesn't do that. When he takes the trap sounds of 808s and rattling hi-hats and so on, it doesn't mean anything. It's just completely a floating signifier, right? It doesn't have a signified. It doesn't refer. It doesn't have it doesn't have any referent. It's just nothing, and so it's meaningless. And I want music with meaning in it. So that's why this song doesn't work, or at least that that section of the song. And you can, once you start noticing this, you'll realize that a lot of these sort of um, musicians that do something like what Jacob Collier does, right? The sort of weird jazz fusion, electro pop, um, prog, white people music. Um, they have their all of the musical tools they use, they act as if they exist in a vacuum, and that you can just sort of take and mix and match anything that you want without saying something. But you can't. Whenever you do that, you are saying something. You are interacting with not just abstract musical elements, but real aspects of culture, human society. Um, and if you don't do that with intention, then it's just meaningless. You've completely missed the point. And obviously, traditional music theory has no way to account for this. It doesn't know that society exists outside of notes on a piece of sheet music. It doesn't have any way of dealing with that fact, which to me means that it's completely inadequate at analyzing any sort of music, because music is society. Music comes from, it's a product of culture. So if you're not interacting with that this isn't to say that Jacob, you can't have fun, right? You're not allowed to have fun. Like, I don't want you to misread what I'm saying here. I'm not saying if you're a white person you're not allowed to make rap music. That would be stupid, right? That, like, or you have to pay respect to some, like, there's no rules. What I'm saying is, if you want to if you're going to take from a certain aesthetic of a certain part of culture, you have to realize that you are commute that is an act of communication. You're not, these sounds aren't just meaningless, uh, or at least they don't exist in a vacuum. They exist within some sort of cultural context. So when you put those elements in your song, you are making a reference to some aspect of culture, and you know that could become very jarring or strange or disconnected if that doesn't gel with the rest of the elements of the song. Like, um I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example. Let's take one of my favorite bands, Shinsei Kamata-chan, right? Some of their earlier music, Shinsei Kamata-chan, they have they take strongly from Japanese pop music, and to some elements, maybe a bit of shoegaze, a bit of sort of electronic, maybe house music and stuff like that. But they combine it with a lot of interesting textures that are a lot more experimental and a lot more, they're very electronic, very artificial sounding, and often noisy. And so you're combining, you know, uh, pop culture, which is literally popular culture, broad appeal, Japanese pop music, sparkly, upbeat, etc., with the extremely harsh textures of noise music, and experimental music, which come from a different culture. They signify something, um, which is like rebellious and twisted, and kind of broken and strained, like very at odds with all of the things that the pop music signifies, right? Like, pop music signifies the cultural norm, whereas noise music signifies the counter signals of the cultural norm, right? Or uh, what's the word? A sort of a violation of musical norms, right? And so when you combine these two things, it gives an image of sort of an artist who is viewing this cultural norm from a twisted or strange perspective, right? Like, you can't get that just from doing like a Schenkerian analysis of the tonal, um, functional harmony of a Shinsei Kamata-chan song, because it's just a four, it will just be like maybe a four-chord pop song or something. You have to go deeper. You have to go beyond just the fundamentals of notes and look at the sign system of music to be able to make some sort of analysis that has any meaning, content, truth value, or maybe not truth value. That's a bit, but that is of interest. Anything that's of interest. Um, and that was a very basic, like, kind of stupid analysis that I just thought off the top of my head. But um, I think you can just look at this very simply. Where if I play you this song, this is a song by a guy called Gerald. Okay, traditional music theory would have nothing to say about this. It simply could not say anything useful about this song. It would be beyond the scope of traditional music theory. And this is not some minor, you know, like, oh, it's 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 not some, like, oh, well, yeah, of course, traditional music theory is supposed to deal with tonal harmony, and this is no, like, this is jungle music, by a massively popular artist. Like, this is core music. This isn't some, like, if music theory has gaps as big as all of electronic music, basically, like all of the history of dance music, then it's, I'm sorry, it's not a very good theory. It just kind of sucks. It can't account for, like, a large portion of music. When I there's if you want to do analysis of jungle music, like, there's this guy called Kodo Eshun who wrote a book more brilliant than the sun, which is a great book where he has to go about and develop an entirely new theoretical framework to talk about jungle music, because the existing frameworks can't account for what's important and meaningful, what carries meaning in jungle, right? And so he invents all sorts of concepts like texturism and stuff like this, which make a lot of. So what I'm saying is, music theory is just like, unless you are making big band jazz or like traditional European classical music, then the sort of music theory that you're getting taught in school is, just not that useful to have as a common language. Uh, like, that's often how music theory is sold to people, as like, oh, it's a common language, right? Like, it gives you the tools to communicate, but it doesn't. It gives you a very, very limited set of tools to sort of communicate about nothing, about nothing important, right? Like, if I'm talking to another musician, I can get a lot more meaning by making references to, cultural touchstones that we share in common. I can say it's like this band meets this band with a bit of this album, and then, like, that means a lot more. It carries a lot more meaning to talk about music that way than it does to say, well, you take the A flat minor and then you go to the, like, fucking, that carries no fucking useful meaning at all. It's useless. So, you know, if maybe I should be a bit clearer about what I meant at the beginning when I said music theory only deals with fundamental tones rather than complete tones. Like, modern music, especially electronic music, is extremely interested in timbre. Why am I doing all of this shit? I could have just done this. This is the best example. If I look up, like this, right? If I go here and I play, this song, right? Or maybe this song. Right. Music, you're fucking, it just, do you understand what I mean? Like, Ortega is not some meaningless niche band. I mean, they kind of are niche, but their influence and importance in modern music can't be understated. Like, if your music theory can't account for just, like, large swaths of music, then it's fucking useless. Like, if you wanted to do an analysis of these noises, you can't talk about just the fundamental notes and their harmonic content, right? Like, or harmonic relations. I mean, like, modern electronic music is very interested with timbre, and I said music theory is good at dealing with harmony. It's not that good at dealing with rhythm. It has no ability to deal with timbre. There is nothing built in to Western music theory to describe timbre at all. It just doesn't have any tools to do that. You know, like, music producers have had to develop their own language to talk about timbre because it never existed in the past, right? Other than referring to pre-existing instruments by name, violin here, flutes here, you know, timpani here, right? uh, if you're in a classical orchestra, then having a scope that limited is okay. But if you're doing anything else, it's fucking useless, right? So, like, I just very simply don't want to hear people get bullied into, like, understanding music theory. You understand music theory by participating in musical practice. If you do music ever, if you listen to music, if you make music, you have a music theory. If you play guitar and you go beep, 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 and you go, that doesn't sound that good, and then you go bow, 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 and you're like, that sounds great. You have me. Congratulations. You have a music. You have a theory of music. You know, like, you can't do music without having a theory of music. It's just I hate the premises which music theory is based on. It just misses the point. It misses the fundamental point, the underlying. It misses the. It's just so fucking limited, and it has no relevance to what 99% of people are doing in music today. That I have no idea why it's encouraged at all. Like, why we even bring it up as if it's something important or aspirational. Like, well, you need to be able to read sheet music. Like, no, you just don't. And if anyone's asking you to read sheet music, they're an idiot. you know, like, they're the one that is stuck on this, like, with this extremely limited framework, trying to stretch. Like, this just wouldn't fly in other academic fields. You know, and it doesn't fly in music academia. Like, I'm not some genius who's the first guy to figure this out. Like, musicologists have known this for ages. That's why the field of musicology exists. It's beyond just music theory. Like, they've known all of this for a long fucking time, for, like, at least 100 years, I would say, uh, maybe longer. Right? Like, you know, they know that music theory doesn't meet rigorous standards as an actual theory of music, and so they don't imbue it with this undue importance that music practitioners do, because the people who teach music practice just broke off from the people who, you know what I mean? Like, there's just it's just a tradition, the traditions of dead generations, etc. uh it's I don't like it. I just dislike it completely. I think it's at the very least, it needs to be significantly extended to account for, like, the bare minimum of rhythmic and timbral content, but it kind of can't. Like, it's just kind of fundamentally limited. Like, when I talk about timbre, as I did, like, just earlier, when I said orchestras have instruments with slow attacks, like, we have a language to talk about timbre: attack, decay, sustain, release, low pass, high pass, all of uh, the language that it takes to do music, to do sound synthesis, right? Like, to describe the process of synthesizing sounds, right? Subtractive synthesis, wavetables, frequency modulations, etc. Like, these tools to talk about this stuff. I don't know, man. I'm not saying to throw it all away. I'm not saying to throw it all away. What I'm saying is, the point of this video is that there is like really undue importance placed upon this. I'm trying to think if there was like, you know what the equivalent would be is like cooking. In cooking, there's like an, at least historically, has been an undue importance placed on like courtly French cooking, right? Which at this point has sort of been expelled in large part from like, you know, cooking, right? Like we've realized that you can't really have a good understanding of cuisine as as a, you know, as a whole if you're only using the language of like this tiny little subset which is like courtly French cooking. And yeah, some of that language is useful. Like we still say, you know, julienne and stuff like that. Like yeah, you can still take some of it, but it's so limited that it's not really relevant to the majority of stuff, right? It's the same. It's the same with music. It's the same. It's the same. The same thing. It would be like I don't even. I'm trying to think of like more metaphors for the non-musical people in the audience, but you know, I really do think that there are such large parts of music that are just missing from music theory that we really shouldn't like even calling it traditional Western music theory is too giving it too much credit. Like we need to I need to come up with a name. We collectively need to come up with a name that aptly describes this thing as being as limited as as it is. Like uh I don't even know. I don't know. This will be an exercise for the viewer. Come up with a funny name in the comments. Um, yeah, that's my video on music theory.